Morning, everyone. So I thought I would take a sort of speculative look at what the far right are up to at the moment, because we can sort of see solidly from polling now that they're they're basically not in control. And what I think is happening is they've got their focus wrong. Since 2010, if you're on the far right, you've always been a minority of even the Conservative Parliamentary Party, but they've been a minority that has punched well above their weight over the last 15 years, really. And if you think, I sort of think about this, it's because you think to yourself, at the moment, they're doing everything wrong strategically. Just, I don't mean the wrong policies, they're all terrible. What I mean is strategically, if they believe in their policies, they're completely going the wrong way about having them implemented. And I think this is because since 2010, they've had to focus only on their colleagues. All they had to do was persuade other Tory MPs to do what they wanted. So those around David Cameron, they persuaded, they threatened, they used UKIP as the stick to beat down David Cameron's door. That's how they got the Brexit referendum. They've been doing it ever since. It's entirely a focus on persuading Tory MPs to do what they want. But the situation's now changed. Used to work. Cameron did what they wanted, and he still won the election. May did what they wanted, and she still won, sort of. Johnson did what they wanted, and he still won. But now they're not going to win. And actually, although they'll say, oh, Rishi Sunak is a terrible Marxist, he's a socialist. It's like, no, he's still doing basically what they want. Not everything that they want, but David Cameron didn't do everything that they wanted. May didn't do everything they wanted. Johnson didn't do everything they wanted. They don't realize just how much, but, Rishi Sunak is still largely doing exactly what they want with a few caveats. And I said a long time ago, if you were to advise, like Rishi Sunak became prime minister end of October 2022. If he actually wanted to win the election, he had 2 years, right? All he had to do, and this is what I would have expected a cynical and intelligent Conservative Party to do. This is what they absolutely would have done, sort of like Conservative parties in the past. They would have spent a year just making things better. That's what they've done. They'd have applied the windfall taxes, which, do you know what? The oil companies sort of recognized they needed to pay anyway. They'd have applied the windfall taxes and lowered people's energy bills. They'd have dealt with the strikes and got NHS waiting lists down. They'd have been coming down, not going up. And it would have been just a few little things. Yes, it goes against Tory thinking, but strategically, it would get voters to think that Sunak was different, because that was his pitch. That was the whole point of getting Rishi Sunak in. He would be different, just like Johnson did before him. Boris Johnson in the 2019 general election campaign, he trashed Theresa May. He trashed David Cameron. He said they were terrible. He was going to be different, a new type of conservatism, right? Completely new. Oh, that sounds like it was the mystery box. Boris Johnson was the mystery box, and people voted for the mystery box. Rishi Sunak was an attempt to do the same thing, but he was in power. Like Boris Johnson wasn't really, because he had a minority government. He couldn't do anything. So he had to say, well, you've got to vote me a majority so I can actually do these things, because Parliament's blocking me. Rishi Sunak can't claim that. He can't claim Parliament's blocking him because he's got a large majority. So he had to actually deliver something. And all he had to do was get some improvements. That would have given them a shot in the election. That would have got the poll gap down. It was the only way they were ever realistically going to have a chance. I'm not saying they could have won. Maybe it was too far gone, but it was the only way they possibly could have done, just to have some improvements. He had to have a record to defend. The Tory record is terrible, but his personal record he could have had one. And things would still be way worse in 2010, but voters do tend to stick with the incumbent unless things are really bad. If they think things are at least improving, they'll go, well, let's just give them another few years. Yeah, people do that. Then after the election, with another 5 years in their pocket, they could just go back to being Tory again. But they didn't do that. They carried on being Tory. In fact, they turned up the Tory dial to 11. And it's costing them. The polls are in a way worse state than they were a year ago. And I don't mean voting intention polls. You could say, they're roughly the same. Okay, they've widened a little bit recently. They've been fairly stable for a long time. No, I mean the individual policies, voter attitudes on individual policies when you break it down. A year ago, Labour were leading on most of them, but the Tories had some. You know, Rishi Sunak, the voters were giving him the benefit of the doubt, right? Now, no, out of the top issues, Labour are just leading on all of them. It's like, you know, it's all gone. The Tories are pushing asylum and tax cuts as their main offers. That's it. Think about what the Tories are talking about. It's like tax cuts or asylum Rwanda bill, right? There's a few, like Rishi Sunak's trying to talk about vaping at the moment. What? You know, and the problem is with those two main things, asylum and tax cuts. Asylum's failing. Now, here's where they've got a particular problem. They're trying to chase after Reform UK voters, right? They're going, oh, well, listen, all these voters to Reform UK, we need to get them back. The polls show that the majority, not all, the majority of those who are saying they're going to vote Reform UK will not vote Conservative no matter what. If Reform UK stand down, they still won't vote Conservative. If the Conservatives do this, that, or the other, they still won't vote Conservative. They're chasing after. There are some people who say they will vote Reform UK who are winnable for the Tories, but it's a much smaller proportion. So they're chasing after these voters, and they're not going to get them back on asylum because their asylum policies are failing. By their own measure, they're failing. So how are you going to win them over? And then when it comes to tax cuts, so Ipsos Mori had a poll out this week. There was quite a lot of interesting things in it. One of which was to show that only 9% of actual Conservative supporters, so Conservative supporters, only 9% of them think that the tax cuts are an issue to consider when deciding how to vote. 9%. That's of Conservative supporters. Of the general population, it's like, what? No. So the tax cuts aren't working either. So they've got these two main policy areas, and neither of them are working for them. You know, and I'll go through some comments before I go into my next sort of bit where I bring this back to the far right. It says, just see if there's anyone's related to this one. Right of politics contracted out of the contract out dollars for mates. I'm not sure what you mean by that, but if you termed in terms of they're not giving enough people amongst the general population the benefits of their economic ideas, then yes, that's sort of the point. That is why we've seen recently, because what normally happens is you're young, and traditionally, even going back generations, young people tend not to be conservative. Why would they be? Because they are, first of all, every young generation is always maligned by the older generations. That's been going back to, you can get examples of that going back 200 years. And also, you're struggling, you know, you're starting your career, whatever it happens to be. You've got your maximum cost, your lowest living standards of your life when you're in your 20s, and you're slowly starting to build up. And then what's supposed to happen is you save up, you get yourself on the housing ladder. You're still not great because that's your mortgage repayments are now really high. But then what happens over the next 10, 15, 20 years is because you're now on the housing ladder, your housing costs as a proportion of your income shrink because your income increases either with just climbing the career ladder or just inflation taking it up. But your repayments, depending on interest rates, basically stay the same. And so your housing costs are proportionally much smaller. So, for example, if you'd got a mortgage 20 years ago for a house that's now would cost you £800 a month in rent, maybe £1,000 a month in rent at the moment, would have cost you about £200, I checked, would have cost about £200 mortgage repayment. So you could be in a house that would cost about £800 to £1,000 to rent, but you're paying £200 a month on your mortgage and you've only got a few years left of that. So that's the difference. So you start to see that you benefit from capitalism. I'd still argue you don't, but you think that, you see that. You're doing a bit better. So some people start to be attracted to the Conservatives, right? And you see this shift as people are usually in their 40s. You see this shift. And what we know is that it's not happening to the same extent now in either the UK or the United States. So it's going off. So this is going to strangle the Conservative source of future voters. But because what's happening here is, I mean, I'm talking here, I was talking there about Rishi Sunak, basically the Tory leadership ignoring voters, trying to appease the far right, ignoring their voters. But it's not just the leadership who are ignoring them. The far right are ignoring voters as well. And I think this is because for so many years, they didn't have to pay attention to voters. And I think some of them never have. Consider Suella Braverman. I know it's first thing in the morning, but consider Suella Braverman. She became an MP in 2015. So she's never had to fight an election before. She never considers what voters want because it's never been an issue for her in her entire political career. She entered politics when the Tories were in the ascendancy, and she has a safe seat. And she had a safe seat then. It's changed because of boundary changes, but she's always been in a safe seat. So safe seat when the Conservatives were doing well nationally. So she has never had to what you'd call fight an election. Voters are an abstract concept for her. She doesn't have to care what they think. And there are plenty who support her in Parliament who are in the same position. There's a lot of these MPs who won in 2015. There was more of a fight in 2017, but they either won in 2015 or 2019 when they had easy contests. They were going to win no matter how bad they were as candidates. And now they're going to lose power. And it doesn't matter what they persuade Sunak to do. In fact, the more they pressure him to do their bidding, the more support they lose for the election. And it's not like they can just think to themselves, right, okay, we're definitely going to lose. So what we need to do is we've got this amount of time to get these policies implemented. That's what we need to focus on. They now don't have enough time. You could sort of see that last year. I could see their urgency last year. But in the position they are now, they don't have time to do anything. It doesn't matter whether the election's May or November either. Even if we say a November election, consider what we've got now. You've got February, March. There's a bit of a recess over Easter, so they go on Easter recess. You've got February, March. Then they've got to focus on local elections. So let's just say there's no general election in May. They've still got to focus on the local elections and mayoral elections, some mayoral elections there. So campaigning is the order of the day there. Then after those, you've got May and June where they sort of are winding down a bit anyways to get ready for summer. You don't see a lot of parliamentary business in those months. Then they go on summer recess in July, and that's the whole of August as well. Then they come back in September for like 3 weeks before they go off again for conference season. And then if they are going to go for a November election, Rishi Sunak could probably announce it in the party conference. So then they're into campaign mode. So they only have like about 3 months. If they were to buy a hypnotoad and have complete control over Rishi Sunak, right? They've got 3 months. What can you do in 3 months? The only thing the Conservatives can do before the election now is finish off the bills that are already going through Parliament. They already have to be going through. If they try to introduce a brand new one, unless it's a small one, if it's a big brand new one, there is no longer the time to get it through. So they can't possibly get a load of things done now. So you think to yourself, so they surely have to be thinking long term, but they're in trouble in the long term as well. Because we talk about like elderly voters tending towards the Conservatives, right? And it has ever been thus. However, I saw someone point out this week, which is quite good. If you look at the proportion of like the elderly voters, particular group of elderly voters who say they're going to vote Conservative, they noticed it was pretty much the same percentage who 35 years ago, when they were in their 40s, said they supported the Conservatives when Thatcher was in power. So the suggestion is, although you do have this well-established phenomenon whereby as people sort of enter their 40s, they tend towards conservatism. There's a suggestion here that after that point, you're sort of more fixed in your views. There are always some swing voters, even amongst the elderly groups. Of course, we've seen that. But for most people, they tend to be more fixed in their views after that point. Now, here's the scenario. So already we know that the people sort of my generate like 40 odds, the 40-something-year-olds are not tending towards conservatism at the same rate. There are some, but a lot are not doing. We know that people all the way up to 50 years old are just not going to vote Conservative. And then you think to yourself, so basically, let us say that if in your 40s, most people have a bit of a, or there are a significant number of people who have a bit of a political pivot. But if after that point you're basically fixed again, then it means the Conservatives are buggered for decades. Now, I don't have polling proof for this. It's just that there's nothing in the polling that disproves it. So it's purely a hypothesis. But if you take that hypothesis, are elderly voters over 60 or 65? So it depends where you look. I'm thinking 70s and beyond. I'm thinking over 70. If you look at, it depends how they break them down, though. Often, like if you look at YouGov polls, they define it as 65 or older. But I'm specifically talking about ones who are firmly in retirement. So are those in their 70s and 80s mostly. But yeah, so you could look at a situation where what will happen is, so imagine this, we're looking at the scenario. I look at this scenario. I always look long term at these things. So Labour are going to win this election. There's going to be a lot of wrinkles that happen. They may not win as polls suggest now. There's lots of factors that are unknowns at the moment, right? But not the least of which is that the Tories are going to cheat like hell, and they're passing legislation to stop the Electoral Commission being able to do much about it, right? So they are going to cheat. It's going to be the nastiest, dirtiest campaign ever, and some of their nastiness may work. I don't know. So lots of unknowns. But there's you think, but Labour's still going to win because it's just so far out now. It's so far gone, and the Tories aren't even trying to attract voters. They're chasing after the voters who aren't going to vote for them, and they're abandoning the ones who are a bit more swingy. But in 10 years' time, we know what will happen. Labour will get complacent. They'll start fighting with themselves again. The Tories will have decided they're sick of losing, and they'll try and make themselves more serious. The whole hideous cycle begins again. I'm assuming at this point we don't get electoral reform. I obviously want electoral reform, and I have some optimism for it. But we'll imagine a scenario where they don't, because if we do get electoral reform, they're basically buggered anyway. So let's assume we don't. So in 10 years' time, we're looking a bit dodgy, and it's looking a bit, squeaky bum time. Except, of course, the Tories may well find they're 10 years down the line, a lot more of these 70 and 80-year-olds that are currently still supporting them are no longer with us. And I am like, at this point, heading towards my 60s. And obviously I'm not changing, but even people of my age group, they're not changing like they used to either. So basically the Tories will have fewer default voters, which means, and the smaller your base is, the harder you have to work, because you need to win a certain number of voters. So and in order to sort of campaign effectively, you try to target types of voter. Like people, for example, keep saying, oh, Labour are too focused on the red wall. And I keep saying, no, they're not focused on the red wall at all. They're focused on types of voter. And the types of voter they're focused on are the ones that are swing voters and exist in sufficiently large numbers in their target seats, which includes the red wall, but is not limited to it. So they're after types of voters. The types of voters that Labour are particularly interested in at the moment, and I mean, particularly, there's lots of types of voters they have to try and target, but the ones that are top of the list are supposedly 50-odd-year-old men who have a decent income, but not a university education, but own their own homes. And I think there was a suggestion that also 40-something single female parents as well. So it's it's so you focus types of target, but the smaller your base is, the harder that is, because then you have to find more groups to make up the deficit, because you've got two types of voter: the one that can be relied to vote on you, and the ones you have to win. And the smaller that reliable group is, that by definition, the larger the unreliable group is, which makes it way harder to fight it. There's a couple of super chats coming, so let's go through those. David Faulkner, thank you. 38 Hong Kong dollars. As we say in China, while there are green hills, there'll be wood to burn. Yeah. Nigel Davenport, I think that's Australian, $20. Thank you. It says good evening. Almost right. Good morning, but yes. So yeah, it's you know, you're looking ahead and you're thinking they're going to have a shrinking pool of reliable voters because my generation are not, and the one below me is not tending towards conservatism. Then this is screwing them over for the future. And the thing is, they may get to a position where the Conservatives, if they want to win power again, may have to not just ignore the far right, but disown them. You know, a bit like Labour are doing with certain groups at the moment to make themselves electable. The Tories could find themselves in the same position, whereby they have to not just try and ignore, not just say, shh, look, we're trying to win the election, you just pipe down for now, because that's what happened last time. That's what happened 15 years ago. What may happen is they may have to publicly disown them. Even in Australia, yes, I understand. I'm an astronomer, you know. Another super chat, Gary DeSantis, £5 super chat, thank you. It says, if they get nasty with messages, we need to nationally refute. Hopefully the public are in a place where they won't cut through. Well, no, I have never have any faith in, the public are now finally starting to see things. I don't wish to be rude to the average member of the public, but the public are never seeing things. Most of the public do not take an interest in politics. They really don't like it. They don't like it when people ram politics down their throat, which is why, you know, we need, when Labour come in, what Labour will want to do and what they need to do is just to quietly get on with things, not to keep bellyaching. They need to keep saying to people, are your lives better? Are your lives better? But stop ramming things down the throat. Stop saying we're doing this. And just ask them, is your life getting better? And that's what they'll need to do. Because, yeah, most of the public don't pay any attention to politics except when it's time to vote. And there's quite a lot of the public don't even vote, so they don't even want to pay attention then. They're sick of it. You know, there are some people, when it comes to election time, which is really exciting for me, there are some people who, you know, some people when like the World Cup's on, oh, bloody hell, we're going to have football for the next month or so. There are some people who are like that with elections. They just hate politics that much. They're not going to vote, and they really don't want it. Good. I hope my MP, Jenrick, loses his seat. I think there's a fairly good chance, yes. But again, we don't know. I mean, you know, you look at there's so many signs that the Conservatives are going to do really, really badly. At the same time, there are so many unknowns as well. But there's not enough unknowns that'll let the Conservatives sneak in. You know, and if I was to sort of bring this, because I've been rabbiting on again now, if I was to bring this to a sort of conclusion in terms of what the lessons would be for Labour, I would say that what's going to happen after the election, you're going to have a lot of Labour MPs who've won their seats relatively easily. Some will have had to fight. There's always some marginals. But you're going to have you're going to have hundreds of Labour MPs who in 2024 are going to win their seat without really having to do very much. And then they'll probably win. Some of them will flip back, of course. Some of them will just then be on to hiding to nothing. But then there'll be a load who still probably win in 2028, 2029. So the worry is that Labour, like last time, get themselves into a position where they think they know how to win elections. Like, right, we've learned it. We now know what we need to do. Therefore, we should do lots of things very differently. And this sort of double think that we criticize the Tories for, it exists in Labour as well. You have a lot of people in Labour. There's people right now who are saying, well, we're so far in the head in the polls. Why don't we do everything really differently now? Like, how do you think we got ahead in the polls? And, you know, the same thing will happen in government. And what will happen is they'll say, look, the Tories are down and out. They're messing about. They don't know what they're doing. They're fighting about. We've got our election machine running like a well-oiled machine now. We can start to do this, this, and this. And instead of focusing on moving the Overton window, it's a bit to the left, What they do is they said, we can now step out of the Overton window, just like last time. And then you'll start to get lots of, fighting, infighting, stuff like that, because inevitably the polls will not remain, there won't be this huge poll gap forever. It'll start to narrow. The Tories will start to get serious. And even though, as I say, they'll have to work really hard because their natural base will shrink, their natural supporters will shrink, they'll still get themselves looking more credible again. And what I would say is where Labour really need to pay attention is I would look at it this way. So if you think back to 2010, so everything was in the Conservatives' favour then. We'd had this huge financial crash, banking crisis, living standards had dropped, not as much as they have under the Tories, but they had dropped. We had a recession, huge recession. Gordon Brown didn't have the charisma of Tony Blair. The economy had still not recovered. It's not like this crash had happened, but then the economy had recovered. Even that can screw you over. The polls were in a shocking state for Labour in 2010. Lots of internal bickering. Because what's if you look at the Conservative Party now with all their infighting, the same thing was happening in Labour in 2010. Not to the same level, like it didn't spill out into the public a lot, but it was happening behind the scenes more. But so instead of uniting, what Labour were doing is pulling against themselves. And it's what happens when the polls are in a bad state. It's inevitably what happens. Because if you're polling well, then everyone goes, well, the plan's working. So pragmatic people go, so why change it? Why change a working plan? You wouldn't. But when the polls are going badly, the only thing everyone agrees on is that the current plan is not working. So obviously, then you do need to change the plan. But that's where the infighting starts, because who can agree which hypothetical plan is best? So that's where your fighting starts. The campaign was also poor. The Tories were looking united again. David Cameron was coming across as a credible leader. He was reasonably charismatic. Labour had been in power for 13 years, so you already had that familiarity breeding contempt. It's already a long enough period for voters to start to think, should we have a change? Well, in 10 years' time, and then think about what happened in that 2010 election. The Conservatives won, but not a majority. So even though Labour had been in power for 13 years, Gordon Brown wasn't a very charismatic leader, the campaign was poor, we still hadn't recovered financially from what the papers said was Labour's fault, right? There was Labour infighting. They weren't being united. They weren't on message. They weren't focused on the election. All of these things, and the Conservatives still couldn't win a majority. Now, part of that was because the Lib Dems did very well. So the Lib Dems were basically their Reform UK of 2010. So the Lib Dems cost the Tories a lot of seats and effectively cost them that majority. But nonetheless, the Tories could not win a majority with everything basically going in their favour, because people ultimately, although they were being turned off Labour, were not satisfied that the Conservatives were the answer. So imagine in 10 or 13 years' time from now, where the Conservatives have lost even more of their natural base, and the same thing may still happen. The same thing may still be the case. Labour may well get complacent. They may well start failing to take voters seriously enough. They may take them for granted, just as the Tories are doing now. That may happen. It happened before. Why not again? And it may still be that the Conservatives still struggle just because that natural base has fallen even more. They struggled in 2010, and they may struggle way more in, say, 2034 or something. But there we go. I'll go for a few more comments before we sort of close off there. If we've got any related to this. Labour also lost many disabled votes in 2010 because their plans to scrap DLA for National Care Service meant help to the elderly. So I don't know, in terms of which specific groups Labour lost, I couldn't recall that. I'll take your word for it on that one. I can't recall offhand. I am always wary of claims like that, I'm afraid, because it's happening now as well. At any one time, there will always be people who say, oh, because of this position, Labour or the Conservatives, whoever you're talking about, are losing this group of people. And then you look at the polls and it turns out it's not true at all, even though you might think it would, because people in general elections some people vote on a single issue, and a lot of people don't. So, you know, for a lot of people, it is really a choice of which one is the better one. So when you say, and you may be right, by the way, I can't recall, but if you say, oh, Labour lost a lot of disabled votes because of their stance on this, that may be true, but I don't imagine they flipped to the Conservatives either as doing better for them. And remember, there are a lot of voters who will go, okay, I don't like Labour's position on this, but do you know what? I'd still rather them than the Conservatives. But at the same time, oh, I missed a super chat, £1 from Ed Catflop. Oh, thank you very much there. At the same time, it's yeah, there are people who will, just because if they don't like a particular policy, where you can lose your vote, which is why I think, I haven't got time to discuss this here, I do think Labour's position yesterday, where they changed their position on bankers' bonuses, I think that was a mistake. And actually, do you know what? Just as I might actually talk about that in the Labour Vision this Sunday. Usually I use that, well, I use it to discuss Labour policies, and usually I use it to explain how it's actually quite a sensible policy. I might do the opposite this Sunday, because I actually think it's a complete pig's ear of a policy. But there we go. We'll have to leave it there for now. It says Labour also had turnout issues due to the Iraq war. In 2005, they got away with it because there wasn't a sense the Tories wouldn't have done it too. Well, 2005 was a weird election. Yes. Yeah, obviously, I mean, one key lesson for Labour is do not shit the bed this time. You know, there'll be things they do that won't please people, right? Because it'll never be good enough for a lot of people. That's just the nature of it. That's the nature of life. Nothing you do will be good enough for some people, for a lot of people. Oh, it's another super chat, Gary Arnold, £2. Thank you very much. But yeah, what you must absolutely not do is to shit the bed in a way that doesn't actually even help you. Like the Iraq war, what good did that do anyone? Didn't do Blair any good, didn't do Britain any good, didn't do Labour any good. It was just a lose-lose situation, utterly ridiculous. It was just sacrificing votes for what? Because he got himself backed into a corner. And I see the bankers' bonus on a really much smaller level being similar. It's like, who does it help? Who does it help? It doesn't help Labour attract votes, but it might help them lose votes. I don't think it will in reality, but it could. The fact that it even could and doesn't gain you votes, so why would you do it? It's not even a good policy. So they can't even say, yeah, but sometimes we have to have an unpopular policy because it is essential for our economic plan. It is in no way essential for their economic plan. Their economic plan was developed several years ago. It's been refined, but it's developed several years ago. And as recently as last year, Labour was saying, no, we oppose this move to remove bankers' bonuses. But anyway, I'm going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Thank you very much for coming on, everyone. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Have a great day or evening in Australia. And until next time, I'll see you later.